All right. We are starting a new parak in Masachet Chagiga. We are in the third parak now, and we're really continuing in the sugya of Tumah, V'Tahara, contamination and purification in the sense of spirituality. Now, we've already seen there were biblical Tumas V'Taharos. We saw there were rabbinical Tumah V'Taharos. We saw there are levels that sometimes require a karvana. Um, so today, the Mishnah is going to show a little bit of a difference, actually, either 10 or 11 differences, where Kodesh, when we say Kodesh, we mean korbanot, stuff associated with eating korbanot, that they have either 10 or 11 strictnesses over teruma, which is the tithe that are given to the Kohen, the gift given to the Kohen, to eat. It also to eat bitahara. So now we're going to have 11 differences or 10 differences listed here in the Mishnah. The one who says it's 10 differences because he didn't say two of the list are actually one and the same. And that will be the Gemara. Let's start off the Mishnah on Dav Chaf Amud Bet, the new Parak Homer. Okay, Homer Bakodesh. There is strictnesses of Kodesh, Miba Teruma, over Teruma. So the Korbanot, the Tahara, the purification, and the Tumah are a little bit more strict than when it comes to teruma. Okay, let's take a look at the list. The first one on the list is shematpilin kalim b'tech kalim and truma of a layla kodesh. When you're going to be toveling kalim to make them tar for truma purposes, right? To put truma food inside, to eat from truma from it. You can put one keli inside another keli, one pot inside another pot, and you could be told with two kalim like that. But when it comes for karbonos, it's more strict, and you can't do that. You have to tovel each keli different separately. Why this is? Why Minik is more over here? Again, Kodesh is more taller, so they want to be more strict. That's the chumrah. The Gemara is going to get into the reasoning behind this one, and so let's move on to the next case. The next case is Ahoraim v'toch ubet hatzevita b'teruma avalo b'kodesh. Okay, so first the bet hatzevita, the Gemara is going to explain as being the place the handles, what you use to hold. And what's going on over here is saying that when it comes to tumos derabanan, by tumos derabanan, just like you have sometimes, we said that the hands become tummy, not the rest of the body, right? In the biblical world, once something becomes tummy, the whole being becomes tummy. With tumas derabanan, you can have where one part of the keli is tummy and not the other part. If the outside got keli or the base or the hands, the other parts are still tar, and that's true by truma. Avaloi by kodesh. When it comes to kodesh, no. If one part becomes tummy, the whole thing becomes tummy. So we're not gonna even by a rabbinic tuma. Okay, that's a chumrah. Again, it's another strictness of kodesh versus truma. Okay, the next one, the third one on the list. Hanoset hamidras noset teruma avalo et kodesh. A person is carrying a barrel of truma. It has a earthenware and klicheres, earthenware vessel that cannot become tummy from the outside. The only way it can become tummy is if you put something in the ear space inside the keli, inside the barrel. And he's also carrying a shoe of the nida, for example, or zav. Okay, where there's tumas mirdas, their weight, what they put their weight on, becomes tummy. So he's carrying this tummy boot, and he's carrying the barrel of truma, and that's fine. But if you had a barrel of kodesh and you had inside karbanos, then he cannot carry the tumas mirdas, the shoe, as well as the barrel of kodesh, earthenware keli of kodesh. We're going to see in the Gemara, not today, but we're going to see that's because of a story that actually happened, that someone was carrying tumas mirdas, and he's actually wearing the shoe, and the shoe snapped, and he wanted to put the shoe on top of the barrel, and it went inside the barrel, and it got the whole thing messed up. So the Chachamim made the gezerah, don't carry mirdas and kodesh. But by Truma, there was no such gezerah. Next. Begdei ochle Truma, midras lakodesh. We already saw this in the last parak, that the person's clothing who eats Truma is considered mirdas for the person who eats kodesh. As it's a more higher level, so the lower level clothing will be considered tumas mirdas. Next, number 5. Loch, you mean that the kodesh midas truma, the characteristics of kodesh is not like the characteristics of truma. Sheba kodesh matir u'nagiv u'matbil achkach kosher, u've truma kosher acher kach matbil. When it comes to be toveling kodesh, karbanos associated stuff, such as clothing, a person has to untie knots, and then he dries the garment. Right? He has to make sure it's not wet. According to Rambam, Perishim Mishnayos, he has to make sure it's not dirty with fats or other dirt. Clean it off. And then he's tovel it. But by Truma, he can make all sorts of knots and tovel it. It's not a problem. So again, another stringency of Kodesh. You got to untie knots in the clothing. And you got to make it dry. Whereas by Truma, you can have the knots. Okay. Next is Kelim Hanigmarim B'Tahara Tzrichim Tvila LaKodesh Avaloi LaTruma. We know that a Keli cannot be Mekabel Tuma until it becomes complete. So when it became complete, we know it was tar. There was nothing Tameh around. Still for Kodesh, for using for Karbanos, you still have to be Tovelet. You still have to Tovelet. Not for Truma, but for Kodesh. Hakeli mitzdarf mashe betochel kodesh avalo letruma. Okay, the guy has a keli, has a pot, whatever he has, and he has inside there pieces of korbanot, pieces of meat, and one of the pieces, first of all, none of the pieces are touching. They're all separate pieces on the plate. Okay? And one of the pieces become a tummy. What's the din with all of them? The halacha is all of them become tummy, the same as that one that got touched and became tummy. But that's not the din for truma. The din for truma is no. If one got touched, the rest of them don't become tummy. And even if they are touching, one piece is touching the other, the first one is a Rishon, the second one is a Sheni, the third one is a Shlishi, and that's it. The rest of the pieces are going to be tar. And you can't get more than a Shlishi by Truma. So there is a difference of how you treat the Tuma in a pot, that be a Truma or Kodesh, in a pot that gets touched by Tumah. By Tuma, does it become all the same? That's Kodesh. By Truma, no, it just passes down and then stops. Okay. Haravi'i by Kodesh Pasal, Vashlishi b'Truma. We know by Ravi'i, by the Kodesh, by Karbanos, it goes up to a level of Ravi'i of Tuma. By Truma, up to a Shlishi. Or by Truma, and by Truma, im nitma'et achat me'edav, chever tahora. If one of his hands, right, become Tameh with rabbinical Tuma, his other hand is still okay, it's still tar. But Uva Kodesh, he's dealing with Kodesh, matbil shtehen. He has to put both of them into the mikvah. His both hands. Remember, there's netilat yadayim and there's netilat yadayim and there's tfilat yadayim. You have to do tfilat to your hands. Matbil shtehen. Shahayad mitamad chavletah kodesh. Perfect kodesh. We're going to assume that one hand, even one hand becomes tameh. It's considered both of them are tameh. Avalo letuma. Lo betuma. Okay. Ochalin. Ochlin, ochalim. We eat food. Neguvin, beyadayim, Musa'avo b'truma, avalo b'kodesh. Okay, here's the story. Dry food. What it means by dry, it means food that was not yet mukhshar, likabel tuma. We know that in order for the food to be able to be, the food can be kabel tuma. That's true. A fruit, an apple, whatever it was, can be kabel tuma. But in order for it to be kabel tuma, it has to first have come into contact with one of the 7 liquids. Yat, chochid, dam, right? One of the 7 liquids, which is dew, wine, oil, blood, milk, and bees' honey. And 6. Where's the 7th one? Water. Yeah, water. I'm going to say water. Okay, so water. That's the 7. And when it touches this liquids, now kimakabo tuma. So let's say it never touches liquids, and the person's hands are tame. If he touches the dry food, it stays not tame. It doesn't become tame. That food will become because it was never wet. So therefore, it doesn't become tame. So guess what? For truma, we allow that. Avalo kodesh. But by kodesh, even if the food is dry and it never was mukhshar, still you cannot eat it with your hands that are tamei, because that's the chumrah of kodesh. That even though it's not going to become tamei, we're not going to let you eat it unless your hands are tahor. And finally, the 11th case from the Mishnah is ha'onen umhusar kippurim tzichin tvila lakodesh avalo leteruma. Okay. What is this? Okay, an onen. An onen is a person whose one of his 7 close relatives passed away. Father, mother, brother, sister, son, daughter, or spouse. That's 7. So one of them passed away. He becomes an onen. He's parted from all mitzvahs on the first day of the death until the burial. Okay? Now, I'm talking about a case where this onen never came in contact with the dead body. He's just an onen because his relative died. But he never came in contact with the dead body. So, here we're saying a person is onen, he never became actually tamei, yet he has to go to mikvah before he's going to eat kodesh, but not before he eats truma. Okay, so onen, guy had a relative that died, he never became tamei to their body. Still, he has to go to the mikvah before he eats kodesh, but not for teruma. The other case is the mechusar kippurim, basically like the yoledet, the zav, the mitzorah. After they are cleansed and they go to the mikvah that night, they can eat truma already, but they still need to bring korbanot the next day to be completely tahor. So it's called mechusar kippurim, means they're missing from the atonement. They still have to bring the korbanot. After they bring the korbanot, technically they're completely tahor. Yet the Chachamim said they have to go back to mikvah after mechusar kippurim. After they bring the korbanot, they go back to the mikvah, and only then they can eat kodesh. But for teruma, that's not true. For teruma, they don't have to go back to the mikvah. Teruma, they can eat without going back to the mikvah. So this is ha'onen or mechusar kippurim avalo leteruma. Okay, those are the 11 strictencies that we saw in the Mishnah of kodesh korbanot versus teruma. So now the Gemara is going to get a little bit into it. Let's see what the Gemara is saying. Bekodesh, what's the reason when you have the first case in the Mishnah, a keli should be keli, a pot inside a pot, you cannot, what's it called, tobel it that way. So Amar Rav Ila, and for Truma you could, but not for Kodesh. Why is this? So Amar Rav Ila, keli choitzet. Because what's the problem? It's chatzitza. What's the chatzitza? What's the interposition? Is that if you have one pot on top of another pot, the pot in the inside pot is going to be pushing down on the outside pot, right, from the inside, and it's going to be a spot that might not get toveled by the water because it's being blocked by the pot inside. So therefore, for Kodesh, you're more strict, and we don't let you do keli b'toich keli. Now the Gemara asks the question. 1 second. Later on, the 5th case in the Mishnah was where a person had a beged and it was tied, and we said for kodesh you have to untie it, right? Most presumably that's about chatzitza. Actually, it says in the Mishnah, right? We want to make sure there's no chatzitza there. So v'ha mid the seif mishum chatzitza, reisha lav mishum chatzitza. Then the first part should not be about chatzitza. You can't tell me two cases are about chatzitza, about interposition. Then it's the same case, and then there's only 10. Diktani seva, and it says in the end, v'lo yichamin yadat kodesh midat truma, shebekodesh matir menage v'matbil achach kosher, but truma kosher achach matbil. So, and that's all about chatzitza, and yet that's the fifth case. So why are you saying the first case is also like that? So says Rabbi Ela, yeah. Rabbi Ela says, yeah, both Reisha, V'Seifa, Mishum Chatzitza. They're both about Chatzitza. Tzrichan, you need both cases about Chatzitza, about interposition. The Ashmin on Reisha, because if you only taught me the first case, Havamina Hainu Tamali Kodesh Light. That's the reason why for Kodesh it's not Mishum Kvedush Keli Dika, because it's heavy. Aval Seifa, the like Kvedush Keli. But in a case of a tied up beged, I would say there's no problem there. Maybe there's no kodesh, not a problem either there, because there's no heaviness on it. The Ashmin and Seifa, and if you taught me the last case, only have me had time of the kodesh light. The reason why tied up begadim are no good by kodesh mishum diktir b'maya hu decay mehadak, because when you put the water in the knot in the beged, it all gets tighter. So that's the chatzitza, because it's a tighter. It looks like chatzitza of a reisha, but in the first case, the maya akpuye makpule lemana lo chatzitza. Maybe with a pot inside another pot, there's buoyancy, right? The water is going to pick up the other pot on the inside. Lo chatzitza, it's not going to be a chatzitza then. So therefore, Tzricha tells both cases kodesh we're worried about, and therefore you can't do it that way. Not either a pot inside a pot, not a beged that is tied up even above the chatzitza. They're different worries of chatzitza. So in the end of the day, they are actually 10 differences, because chatzitza is two of them, and he says two of them, and they're one difference, but in two aspects of the difference. And Rabbi Ela the Tameh, and Rabbi Ela is going according to his reasoning, right? Rabbi Ela, Rabbi Chanina bar Papa, Esther Ma'alot Shanukan. Even though the Mishnah has a listing of 11, there's actually only 10 stringencies over the truma. Chamesh Rishono. Now there are 5 of the first ones. 5 of the first ones. That bein lekodesh, bein lechulin shenasul to the kodesh. Not only is it for kodesh, says Rabbi Ela, like we said in the Mishnah for korbanos, but also if someone eats chulin, regular food, and he eats it al taharat hakodesh, and he eats it on the level of kodesh, he's treating it as korbanot. Those first 5 stringencies apply to chulin as well if it's treated as kodesh. Achronot lekodesh, I will love the chulin shasot to kodesh. But the last 5 are not going to be applicable to chulin that's used as chulin that's being eaten as kodesh. That only applies to kodesh itself. My time. Why are you going to split it up? Chamesh kamaisa the itlahu the rara the tuma midoraita. Gazu rabbanim and the kodesh and the chulin shasot to kodesh. Patrata the late lahu the rara tuma midoraita. Gazu rabbanim the kodesh the chulin shasot to kodesh lo gazu behu rabbanim. So says the Gemara, the reason is because the first 5, even though it's again all rabbinical in nature, these gezerot, but the rabbis gezerah for the first 5 are more biblically based, and as such, we would also put it over. We'll move it also to chulin that's eating al taharat hakodesh. But the last 5 are a completely rabbinic with no basis in biblical approach, and therefore we do not transport it to chulin that's eaten al taharas hakodesh. And Rashi goes through how they are biblical. So the chatzitza, chatzitza, when it's in a real chatzitza, the oraita, it's talking about it's related to a biblical prohibition. You have to make sure there's no chatzitza. So therefore, chatzitza is biblical in nature, even though these cases are not. But it's biblical in nature. The idea. Oh, chatzitza. Same thing with the keli with its different parts, right? The second case, different parts. Is that, and biblically speaking, if the keli becomes tummy, the whole keli becomes tummy. So it's biblically related. Therefore, it transports to chulin that is eaten on a kodesh level. The third case, midras, right? The midras is also tumas that is the oraita and could be issues of the oraita. Therefore, it is biblical in nature and it transports over to chulin that's eaten al tar sakodesh. The fourth one, the garments of the person is also tumas mirdas, which involves the concern for a biblical tuma. So also moves on to there. Strictly number 5, when you finish a keli, right? When you finish a keli, we're worried that a slive and amaretz may have been from a zav and it's fallen into it. So that's a avatuma, that is biblical, and therefore it transports the chulin that's eaten b'kodesh. What about the last 5? Well, the last 5, it's completely rabbinical, right? Because to say that all the pieces of meat that are not touching are all in the same tuma, that's a completely rabbinical thing. There's no such thing in the right. There's no such thing. It has to be touching or something. So therefore, it only applies to kodesh and not the chulin that's eaten by kodesh. That tuma goes to a 4th degree of tuma. That's completely rabbinic as well. There's no such thing in the right. Therefore, it only applies to chulin. Only applies to kodesh, not the chulin that's eaten like kodesh. And the last 3, one hand contaminates the other, right? No such thing as hands becoming tummy. That's completely rabbinical. Eating dry foods with contaminated hands and onin and a lack of mechusik kaparim who needs to go to the mikveh again. All these are, again, nothing related to biblical. They're completely rabbinic in nature. Therefore, they do not apply to chulin that's eaten al taharas hakodesh. Okay, that's that long note on 21B1 and note 5. That was very, very in a very short version. Okay, Rava Omar. Rava says he should know it's not 2 cases of chatzitza. So he's arguing in Rabbi Elo's explanation. Rabbi said there's only 10 differences because 2 of them are actually chatzitza, 2 different aspects of chatzitza. But Rava is going to say no, there are actually 2 different cases. Rava Omar mishum chatzitza. The last case, the case of the beggar that's tied up, that's chatzitza. Reisha lab mishum chatzitza. The first case of keli, the keli is not about chatzitza. It's a whole different idea. Reisha hainu tama. What's the reason of the first case of the keli tala casey? This is the case. Gizer shlo yatbil mechatin v'tinoro b'chli she'en b'piv kishofaferet hanod. All right, we're dealing here with something called hashaka. Hashaka is the passage, the connection of 2 adjacent mikvaot. All right, so the way most mikvahs in the world work is that you have a bore where people go and they dunk into, and in there it's filtered, and you have chlorine and all that other stuff. But that's a kosher mikvah, but it's not where the actual mikvah water is. There's usually another bore that has 40 saw of water, the rainwater and everything came into a kosher way. And now in between this bore, this pool of water, and the pool of actual mikvah water, there is a passageway. Okay? It has to be, we're going to see 5 centimeters, and it has to be like 2 fingers can fit inside and move around easily. And the water has to be able to pass through each other in this big enough hole. And when it touches each other, these waters, it now becomes a kosher mikvah as well. That's hashaka. So it says here, the case is as follows, is where the keli is a keli that has a small hole. And inside that hole, he put a bunch of small needles and hooks and stuff like that. And now he's putting this keli inside the mikvah. Now the hole is so small that it's not kosher for hashaka. The passage doesn't work. So let's take a look. Kidditna, like we learned. Eruv mikvaot kishvaferet hanod. In order to have the mingling of the mikvaot, for 2 of them to become one, or to be considered to become kosher, whether it's the other mikvah, the board doesn't have 40 saw, or it's a puzzle of mikvah, has puzzle water, has water from the sink or whatever it is. As long as there's a passage of a wineskin tube, okay, they used to have wine skins to drink from, and they used to put a tube inside. So that's the tube. Tequila Yaakov says it's 5 centimeters. Kaviyah, the size of its thickness, and the size of its hole, were 2 fingers that can rotate inside of it. So, okay, wait a second. So here we go. So here's the case. So here, according to Rav, the reason for the Mishnah stringency not to immerse vessels within vessels of the person kodesh is the concern that what might come to immerse small utensils such as needles or spinning hooks, which fit into the narrow neck container in a vessel whose neck is smaller than a skin bottle's tube. Since the outer vessel opening is smaller than the skin bottle's tube, the water inside would be deemed disconnected from the mikvah, and the immersion of the noodles of spinning hooks would be biblically invalid. That's the issue. Now, there are actually 11 differences in the Mishnah, right? Because the first one is not to do with chatzitza, but rather with hashaka. And the first one, and the first 6, including hashaka, is a biblical issue. Therefore, ben the kodesh, ben the chulin shasol tar the kodesh, achronola kodesh. But the last 5 is for kodesh, awalo the chulin shasol tar the kodesh. Now, ma'ika. What is the difference between Rava and Rabbi Ila? Rava says because of hashaka, and Ila said because of what's it called, chatzitza. So what's the difference? It says sal vergargutni shemilan kelin v'hit bilan. You put it in a large basket, or you put it in a strainer, and it has a lot of holes in it. If you say because of chatzitza, guess what? There's still a chatzitza, because even though you have a bunch of holes in the thing, there's still a part of the part that's touching something that's in there, in the basket. And therefore it's still a chatzitza. So according to Ila, it's still problematic. When it comes to a big basket, and it comes to a wicker basket, there's always a hole bigger than the tube. So you never have less than a kishar hanod, and therefore in a basket will be fine according to Rava. Rava goes according to his reasoning. Rava, sal the gargutni. You put in a basket or a large strainer vessels and you immerse them, they're tar. They're tar even for Kurdish. Rava's ruling here, and that is consistent with his previously stated explanation, since the decree against immersing vessels within a vessel is based upon the concern that one may immerse vessels within vessels whose opening is not the size of the skin bottle's tube. Then it's standing that this decree does not apply to basket or large strainer, which are not subject to the concern that their opening be smaller than a skin bottle's tube. So no problemo. Okay. Now it comes a little bit more interesting. Umikva shechelku besal the gargutni. Atol sham lo alta lo tivila. Let's say a guy went to head, took a mikvah. The mikvah has, let's say, 50 saw of water, 60 saw of water, whatever you want. Just not 80. Okay. So a guy took a 60 saw of water mikvah, and he throws in the middle of the mikvah, he makes a mechitza, smack down in the middle. Mechitza has small little porous holes. Okay? Small little ones. Each one is less than 5 centimeters. Okay? And he puts that in between. What happens then? It's not considered he went to the mikvah. We're saying as follows. In order for it to be kosher, you have to have 40 saw in one place. Now, you're splitting it with the mechitza that has a bunch of holes in it. You're still splitting it. In order for the 2 holes, there are 2 sides to be counted as one, you have to have a hole of 5 centimeters. This kishafaferet hanod. If you don't have the kishafaferet hanod, even if you have a bunch of small ones, it's not considered one. You have to have a hole of 5 centimeters in a passageway like that the waters could connect that way. Otherwise, even if it's a bunch of small little holes, it's not going to be considered connected. So that's the idea. You have to have that 5 centimeter hole, and that's going to allow for it to be connected. If you don't have it, even in a bunch of little holes, it's not going to be considered connected. And now, says Gemara, and this whole idea where we said if you have it in another pot and that other keli has a small little hole, it's less than 5 centimeters, and we said it doesn't work. When was this? Haini mili b'chli tahar. That's if the keli itself was tahar. The keli with the less than 5 centimeter hole is when the keli itself is tahar. But if the keli itself was tame, and you have to table the keli, Bigoy de salka tvila lekula gufe demona salka lahu nami lechelim de itbe. Listen to this. Here we said that if the keli is tummy, I have this keli with the small hole, and the keli is tummy, and I total it with things inside of it. Everything becomes tar. The keli and the things inside, because now I'm not using hashaka. I'm not connecting the water. The keli is tummy. Take keli itself becomes tar. And when the keli becomes tar, everything inside of it also becomes tar, right? It's not kelim shemilim bilin kelim shemilim and kelim mitbilan. The keli have put inside more stuff, more kelim. Hare elu taharin. They're tar im like tavel, but if he didn't tavel them, mayim aravim, then the mixing of the water is achim aravim kishafer that no. They need to have it open 5 centimeters. My kamar below tavel. What do you mean didn't tavel it? Hachi kamar. If it doesn't need tefillah, I mean it's tahar. Then it works by mixing waters. So then you need it to be mixing with a 5 centimeter hole, and that you don't have. But if it's tahar and you put it in even with stuff inside of it less than a 5 centimeter hole, then it would be considered tahar, everything inside of it, because the whole thing is becoming tahar. That's the way the Rambam brings down the halacha as well as Rava brings it over here. Okay, so Azat Hashem, this is where we're going to get up to for today. We'll pick it up next time from over here.